Dealing with difficult people is not easy to do. Many people either try to avoid them or try to use reason or argue with them, which either leads to anger, mistrust, and rarely goes anywhere. When dealing with difficult people, we think, why can't they just get it? Or maybe we are optimistic and we think, if only they can get this one point. And then we beat them over the head with this one point. Hello everyone, today's episode is about working with difficult people, such as a family member, a friend, neighbor, co-worker, or boss, and not only growing in holiness with them, but also having them to do what you want them to do in most cases. The saints like Saint Therese and I use a skill that helps us grow in virtue with difficult people, and even in most cases can make the difficult person do what you want them to do. I'll go over this skill so you can grow in holiness and love. Not theoretical, but practical. Real-life Catholic advice for Practical Catholic.
Welcome to another episode of Practical Catholic with David Cease. Practical Catholic is a spiritual coaching show to help you find peace, love, and joy in family and work life. We are here each and every week to help you grow spiritually, to become successful in this life, and to be a saint for the life after.
My story begins about 10 years ago. I had landed a fairly large a contract with the state government, and so it was basically to replace a paper-based licensing system with our technology. I'm a owner of a technology company, and so I decided to personally become the project manager on this project. So when I was running these meetings, we had a certain task that we had to do. It was basically just run this little application, this little program on the database so that it could modify the database. So what happened was that this task wasn't getting done. And after 2 months, literally 8 weeks of not getting this task done, I kind of had to push the manager and say, why isn't this task getting done? And so the manager replied back and he said, well, I've been talking to the database administrator and he's giving me all these excuses and why he can't do it and blah, and all this stuff. So finally I asked the manager, I said, is that all right if I talk to him? And he said, sure, you could talk to him. So I asked him, what's his name? And let's say for this scenario, his name is Larry. He said, well, his name is Larry. And he goes, but you probably don't want to talk to him. And I said, why wouldn't I want to talk to him? And he goes, well, he's a yeller. And I said, what's a yeller? And he goes, he yells at you. And I laughed. And I said, really? He yells at you? He goes, yeah, he's a former military guy. And, when he gets frustrated and angry, he just yells at you and kind of embarrasses you in front of all his coworkers and stuff. And he really doesn't care what he thinks, and what people think about him. But, for me, I get embarrassed and I walk away. So I said, all right, let me still talk to him and let me see what I can do. So I went, they showed me his cubicle from a distance, and I started walking towards his cubicle, and I noticed from a distance that there was an Army patch. It was the 101st Airborne Division patch. Now, I know a little bit about the 101st Airborne Division because prior to joining the Marines, I always wanted to be in the military. But I decided that originally I was going to join the 101st Airborne Division. That was the one I was pretty, interested in doing. So I knew a little bit about them, and I read one battle in Vietnam called the Battle of Hamburger Hill. In fact, there's a movie called The Battle of Hamburger Hill. It's a famous battle that they fought in Vietnam. Now, that was the only battle that I knew. Now, judging from his age, I knew he was probably a Vietnam War veteran, just kind of knowing him from distance and seeing what kind of age he was. So I kind of connected those two pieces together. So when I approached Larry, I said, hey, Larry, my name is David. And he looked at me and he goes, what do you want? And I said, hey, I noticed that patch over there. It's the 101st Airborne Division. And he said, yeah. And I said, yeah, that's very interesting. I said, were you in that battle called Hamburger Hill? And as soon as I said that, his eyes lit up like there was no tomorrow, as if he just wanted to tell me everything about this battle. So I sat down with him, and because I knew somewhat about the battle, I asked him questions, and he answered, and he was just so enthralled that there was a person who wanted to listen to him about this battle. And rightly so, because it's a famous battle. It was a difficult battle, and he risked, literally life and limb to fight this battle. It was very controversial as well. So he spent a lot of time, and I was very interested in the battle because as a former military person and everything else. So we spent about, I would say, an hour just talking about the Vietnam War and all this other stuff. So after about that hour, I said to him, "Hey, Larry, is it all right if you run this program for me? It needs to get done." And so he said, "Sure." And so he tried to run this application. And I realized he didn't know how to do it. So I said to him, "Hey, Larry, is it all right if I do it for you?" And he said, "Sure." And so I actually ran the program for him, and we got it accomplished. And I looked at him and I said, "Larry, that was great explanation about the Vietnam War. I am so amazed about what you did and the great things that you did there." And, he was happy. I was happy because I got the script done and I got more knowledge about the Vietnam War and the Hamburger Hill. And so we left. But here's the thing. I was able to avoid growing angry and impatient because he wasn't doing my scripts. What I got accomplished in 1.5 hours to get that script running, the manager couldn't do in 2 months. Most likely because, and it's not his fault, but he was probably bossing him around or saying to him, "You got to get this done. You got to get that done. You got to get this done." And in lots of cases, that's not really the best way and approach, especially if it's taking you 2 months, or especially if the person is, quote, a yeller, a person who's going to be difficult to work with. So the way that I hedged the bet here was I became a friend to him. I started a relationship with him by first talking with him with a common topic, which is the Vietnam War, which I knew he would be very interested in. And because of that, I was able to get the script done. So it was amazing how we can get done if we first focus on a relationship building and then asking them to do something or reason with them. Okay? The reason why I'm having this topic is because in the season of the presidential voting, we always talk about politics around Catholics, or at least I'm always drawn. The Catholics always say, well, this and that, and all the presidential elections and the debates, which I really don't watch. But eventually, inevitably, it always digresses into a conversation about difficult people. Why a Catholic, maybe let's say a child has left the faith, and they're voting, in a way that is contrary to the Catholic Church teaching. Maybe it's a boss who has a contrary political view, or a friend who was very close, maybe in high school or college, and now all of a sudden you changed. You went through a conversion, and you think you should be voting this way, but your friend hasn't changed, and they're voting a different way. So it always digresses into these difficult situations or difficult people that they have to work with, friends unfriending others on Facebook and all that other stuff. And so we're always confronted with these difficulties, right? And a lot of times, sometimes we run away from them, or most of the time we try to argue with them, okay? And it's very hard to love these people, right? It really is. But like Jesus says here in Luke chapter 6, 32 to 36, and this is important. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. And if you lend to those from whom you hope to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much gain. But love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return. And your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High. For God is kind to the ungrateful and the selfish. Be merciful, even as your Father is merciful. Listen to that, right? So we can't avoid not working with these people, right? We can't avoid them. In fact, I'm going to show and point to you that we actually have to work with them if we want to be holy. If we really want to go to heaven and be holy, we actually have to work with difficult people. It's going to be the mandate, okay? And that's what Jesus is saying. So, one thing I like to do is to zoom out. We have to zoom out and see the grand picture, okay? So I'm going to give you the zoom out main point here, okay? The biggest thing that we need to do here on earth is to grow in holiness. I think every good Catholic will know that, right? It's embedded in our head, the universal call for holiness. We need to become holy, okay? Now, how do we become holy? Well, we become holy by acquiring virtues. Every saint had to have heroic virtues, okay? To be declared a saint, the only thing that you need, okay, on earth, when that saint lived on earth, the only thing that you need to have is what they call heroic virtue, okay? Heroic virtue is the virtue in which the natural virtues, whether it be patience, whether it be love, whatever it is elevated so high that, it is heroic level, right? So it's great to be patient, okay? But like Jesus dying on the cross, he was patient with them even when he suffered greatly, okay? No human being can do that. And the reason why, as Catholics, and only Catholics, and Christians that is, with grace, can achieve heroic virtue, okay? Non-Christians can't do that because they don't have sanctifying grace. They don't have that grace to elevate the natural virtues to the supernatural level, or what we call heroic virtue. So grace is kind of like testosterone, right? It empowers that muscle, that virtue, to get to a higher level than outside of its natural capabilities, okay? So that's all what saints need to have while they were here on earth. They don't need miracles. They don't need to do anything such. Yes, after they die, okay, to declare them a saint, they need to have a miracle after they die. But when they were on earth, they have to prove that they have heroic virtue. Even if there was great miracles by this person, and they were deemed miracles, if they can't prove that they don't have heroic virtue, then that person will never be declared a saint. So how do we get heroic virtue? Well, first we have to have regular virtues, okay? We have to have the regular virtues there. So, and we have to build those virtues. And they become heroic because they kept getting stronger and stronger and stronger, to the point where when it was tested at the final moment of this great distress and difficulty, okay, it was able to elevate it to a heroic level. So we got to keep practicing our virtues until we can elevate it to the heroic level through grace, okay? So the point being here, when we zoom out, is to get virtue, we have to be able to practice them. You can't acquire virtue through learning. I don't care, how much we teach the virtues, we read about the virtues, we read about great saints who practice those virtues. It's meaningless, absolutely meaningless, until you practice them, okay? Until you practice every single virtue. So how do we practice them? Well, we practice them by being in the situation that requires us to use that virtue. That's what we do. We can either artificially create it by using, penance, certain types of penance that we do, okay? Or we're in a situation that calls for those virtues to be used. And 99.9% of that is either because of difficult people or difficult situations, okay? So in most cases, we might not be in a difficult situation, but we do have to deal with difficult people. And so that's how we grow in virtue. 99% of the time, we grow in virtue because we have to deal with difficult people, okay? So difficult situations might be, maybe you're out of a job, or you don't have any money, or you might have a lot of kids or something like that. But at the end of the day, those difficult situations probably came about because you had to deal with difficult people, right? Even our children could be difficult to be working with. So that's the main zoom out. So if we look at it as an equation, we can say Holiness equals virtue, okay? Acquiring virtue. Acquiring virtue equals working in difficult situations and or difficult people. So that's why. So Jesus' statement about loving other people who only love you, how can you acquire virtue if you're dealing with people who love you? You don't need to, okay? So it's not just a good saying, but it's common sense what Jesus is saying. Jesus is clearly saying is you can't grow in virtue if you're dealing with people who already like you, or dealing with people who will lend with you, okay? Who's going to pay you back? You can't, okay? That's why a lot of times, I tell people faith isn't faith unless it's tested, right? There's a lot of times where I pray for a certain, material need that I need, especially running a business, I'll pray. And I've gotten to the point where I pray it. In the beginning, I pray and I would be all nervous and whatever. And then right at the nick of time, God answers my prayer and I get money. I don't know how many times in my business I did pray. And, I'm thinking, man, is he going to answer my prayers? And he does, just in the nick of time, when I absolutely was about to fail, he gives me what's going on. Well, why? Because faith isn't faith unless it's tested, okay? If I prayed for the money and it came instantaneously, then he's just a slave to me. God is a slave. But every day when I pray to him, I have a conversation with him. I talk to him. And I say, Lord, I really need this. This is what's going on. And to the point now where I really know that he's just testing my faith in doing that. And whether he answers my prayer or not is not relevant. It's that I trust in him now. I trust in what he's going to do. So that's exactly what we're going to realize. So when we zoom out, we have to understand that God is there giving us these difficult people, giving us these difficult situations to grow in virtue and grow in love. Once you get that, you can realize that, every time a difficult person comes into play, I kind of also chuckle and laugh and say, you must be sent by God to make me holier than I need to be. All right. We have a saying in our family, there are saints and there are saint makers. And sometimes we're both. But we'd have to look at it and say, yeah, that's a saint maker right there. Okay. And we have to be mentally prepared. So what's the zoom in main point? What is it am I going to try to prove or show in this episode? Well, when we face difficult people, there's three types of ways that we can approach it, okay? And they kind of follow, two of them follow the pattern of fight or flight. There's that initial reaction of fight or flight reaction. So when we see a difficult person, we fall on, the first two fall under the fight or flight situation. The flight is we try to ignore them and try to leave them, right? That's the flight situation. You want to try to avoid them like the plague, okay? And that's not really beneficial. That's not going to grow in holiness, right? Because you're falling under the trap of what is it to love those who love you, right? Because you're trying to avoid the people who don't love you. So you're not going to grow in virtue. And as Jesus says, what is the gain if you're going to love people who love you back, right? So we can't ignore and leave them, okay? The second is the fight, right? We want to debate or argue with them. When we have difficult people, we just want to keep debating and arguing and doing these things. And in most cases, first of all, that's not loving, and you're not going to grow in virtue. But the second is that you're probably going to agree to disagree, and that's the best case scenario, and they're going to walk away. The worst case scenario is you're going to get angry and frustrated, and so is the other person, and everyone's going to get entrenched into their own arguments, and no reason's ever going to work out. That's typically what happens. That people don't really listen to each other and they just lobby each other. Just look at the Democrats versus the Republican debates. It's the same thing. Remember my old statement, two rights do make a wrong, because you can always find the right in every situation, right? So that's basically what happens. But there's a third option that's beyond just the fight or flight knee-jerk reaction. And that third option is love them and grow in holiness. Love them and grow in holiness. This is what takes virtue, right? I don't care if it's your family, friends, an acquaintance. You love them, no matter how irritating they are, okay? So I have a couple of models. I said, I'd rather lose an argument and win a soul than to win an argument and lose a soul. A lot of times arguments does not work. You got to remember, winning arguments does not make saints. Even if you won the argument, okay, it doesn't make that person a saint, okay? All right? They still need to do something. Even if you win an argument, a lot of times what I find with winning an argument is, a lot of times, even if I prove that I won, the other person gets angrier. They don't become, oh, you're right, let me see that. Most of the time they get angrier because they just feel like they lost something. They lost a sport or they lost the game or whatever it is. And then they have to come out even with more venom on other topics and issues. So winning an argument, that still doesn't even make them a saint or convert other people, okay? So the one thing I understand is what we have to get at with people is not their intellect. It's actually their heart, okay? The heart cannot be won over by reason. Only by intimate connections, okay? And what I'm going to talk about later down is this idea of, reason versus relationship, okay? What do you approach? Most people try to, use reason or argumentation first, as opposed to a relationship first, then reason second, okay? And so that's the paradigm shift that you can think about. Relationship should come first, then the reason. Just like my story, right? When I approached that person, I first wanted to build a relationship. I didn't want to go right off the bat and say, hey, why aren't you doing that script? Why aren't you running this thing? And why are you late? Do you think that is going to, make any common sense to make him do what his job is? Or say something like, hey, do you know you can get fired if you don't get this task done? Now I'm using threats, right? No. What I simply did was create a relationship. Oh, you were in the 101st Airborne Division and brought a topic about, okay? And that is the skill, okay? That is the skill that we have to learn. Now, what I'd like to do is use St. Therese as an example, okay? St. Therese, okay, had a sister that she really didn't like, all right, and bothered her. All right, and we're going to read her a little excerpts from her book real quickly to understand that she knew that growing in holiness was about dealing with this sister. That she actually desired to be with her, even though her whole body, her whole emotions, her whole passions said, I am disgusted with this person. She overcame it with virtue. And let's listen to what she says. She says, there's one sister in the community who has the knack of rubbing me up the wrong way at every turn. Her tricks of manner, her tricks of speech, her character just strikes me as unlovable. Listen to that. That comes from St. Therese. Unlovable. But then she's a holy religious. God must love her dearly. So I wasn't going to let this natural antipathy get the better of me. I reminded myself that charity isn't a matter of fine sentiments. It means doing things. So I determined to treat this sister as if she were the person I loved best in the world. So that one paragraph she's saying is, there's a sister that ultimately does not, from my own sentiments, from my own passion, seems like unlovable. Every little thing she does. And she's not like committing sin, this woman. She probably has certain attachments or certain mannerisms that just makes it unlovable. Either just doing several things, they speak loudly or maybe aggressively or whatever, okay, that are just unlovable to her. But she says, I'm going to do this. I'm going to put in bay my fine sentiments and I'm going to do things. So it's not a feeling, okay? Love is not a feeling. It's a doing, okay? That's what she's saying here, all right? And that she determined to treat this sister as if she were the person I love best most. She's training her body, her soul, to love this person. That's what she's doing. This is the spiritual exercise. This is what makes her a great saint, okay? Again, going back to what Jesus said. Hey, what is it to love another person who loves you back, right? She could have easily went to her biological sisters. There were two biological sisters in that in that convent with her, okay? And she could have just loved them and said, oh, what great, sisters they are. But instead, she went after the most unlovable religious sister and to train her soul to love everyone, regardless of how they make her feel. That's true love. That's heroic virtue. Okay? But how many of us run away from those difficult people and want to say, no, I really don't want to take that lovable approach, okay? So that's what virtue is all about. We want to train our soul, okay, to love everyone, regardless of how we feel, okay, so that we grow in virtue. That's how we grow in virtue, the virtue of love, right? That's a theological virtue. So now let's read about her inner soul here. She says, every time I met her, meaning this unlovable sister, I used to pray for her, offering to God all her virtues and her merits. I felt certain that Jesus would like me to do that, because all artists likes to hear their work praised, and Jesus, who fashions men's souls so skillfully, doesn't want us to stand about admiring the facade. He wants us to make our way in, till we reach the inmost sanctuary, which is his chosen dwelling, and admire the beauty of that. So in other words, what she's saying here is, we have to look at the good aspects of that soul. God made that soul, okay? And there are imperfections in that soul, yes, that were duly, were there, okay, that for her own, for her own reasons and through sin. But there was some good in there, because this is the work of God. And so if we don't realize the good in a person, no matter how difficult that person is, okay, then we will never see the Jesus inside that person. Jesus that made that artwork, that person, okay? So we have to see that artwork for what it is. Yes, there's deficiencies in it, but the inner side of that deficiency is Christ himself. That's what St. Therese is trying to say. Don't look at the outside facade, the way that she talks, the mannerisms, the way she barks orders, or maybe makes false accusations. But inside of that, outside facade is Christ himself. Because there's good in that person, no matter what. And that's what we have to focus on. That's what we got to see. And then bring that up, okay? So then here's the action and the virtue that St. Therese is doing. But I didn't confine myself to saying a lot of prayers for her. This sister who made life such a tug of war for me, I tried to do her every good turn I possibly could. When I felt tempted to take her down with an unkind retort, I would put on my best smile instead and try to change the subject. Once at a recreation, she actually said, beaming all over, something like this: I wish you would tell me, Sister Therese of the Child Jesus, what is it about me that gets the right side of you? You've always got a smile for me whenever I see you. Well, of course, what really attracted me about her was Jesus hidden in the depths of her soul. Jesus makes the bitterest mouthful taste sweet. I could only say that the sight of her always made me smile with pleasure. Naturally, I didn't explain that the pleasure was entirely spiritual. What she's saying here is, at the end of the day, is action and virtue. Her initial, emotion is to pretty much lash out at her, right? Whether it's an unkind retort or basically saying, I really don't like you, you're annoying, okay? She instead changed that to just smile at her, okay? This is not being fake. This is the ability to change who we are from our soul so that we can truly love, so that we can truly come outside of ourselves from our selfish point of view, which is, my passion's feeling this disgust about you, to, even though my passion feels disgust, I'm going to change my soul to truly love you, okay? She doesn't have any sincere desire or sinister plan for her. That's what would make it fake. Her real desire is to truly love her and not allow these superficial front side of how she talks and the mannerism she does to not like her. She's truly trying to love. That's why she's not fake. And that's what makes the sincerity so great. So we have to understand that the actions are more important. So she converted to the point where the sister says, "Why do you always smile at me?" And she naturally responds, "Because I see the Jesus in you." Okay? The pleasure that she got was purely a spiritual one. And that's where we have to go, into the spiritual realm, not in the superficial facade of the outside person. Ironically speaking, the twist here is that when Saint Therese died, a lot of people thought that the unlovable saint, the unlovable sister, what we'll call, and Saint Therese were actually best friends, but they really weren't. Until they read the autobiography and realized, they weren't really good friends, and that's what it was. But that's what built virtue. That's what made Saint Therese the saint, because she loved all, regardless of how she felt. Okay, so let's go over a few things. Okay, let's go over what is our problem I always talk about the problems, right? What do we do? Okay, I think the first major problems that occurs in loving another person or having that intimate relationship is what I call this over-reliance on reason over relationship. For some odd reason, a lot of people focus on arguing and using reason to try to persuade and do whatever they want, and that might be because we're so taught, and maybe in college or whatever, that debate courses and everything else about how to persuade people, and debating and all the other stuff is not really relevant. It really doesn't work that effectively. Okay, maybe in a court of law, yes, because that someone has to make a adjudication. But in most cases, when we're working with someone, there's no judge over who's right or wrong. That's why debates don't work, because, it's not like, in most cases, it's the person who's difficult that is really the judge. You might have a boss or something like that, or a parent or something like that, who really has a superior attitude over you, and you're trying to argue with that, okay, and it won't work. So a lot of times what we have to do is we have to focus on relationships. Relationships are more important than reason, okay? Here's something to understand. Hearts are not penetrated by reason many times because hearts are burdened by sin, okay? And remember one thing I always say about sin. Sin darkens the intellect and weakens the will. So if you're burdened by sin, okay, you're intellectually not capable, okay, because it's darkened, right? And it's also the will is weakened. That means that the person doesn't even have the will to try to understand your reasoning. That's why it doesn't work, okay? Because, again, sin darkens the intellect and weakens the will. And most people are burdened by sin, almost 90% of the people, especially if you're talking about trying to convert people, right? The reason why Catholics leave the Catholic Church is not because, the Protestant Church is all, they might say, it's fun, it's more entertaining. That's rarely the case. Most Catholics leave the Catholic Church mainly because they have a sin that they can't reconcile with in the Catholic Church. Maybe it's an abortion. Maybe it's same-sex marriage. Maybe it's adultery or a second marriage or something like that, divorce, remarriage. That's what happens. So you can't really reason with a person who's burdened with sin. Again, it darkens the intellect and weakens the will. So you got to have a relationship, okay? Another is, and I said this before, even if you win the argument, it doesn't mean that they're going to, most of the time they get more angry because they're so burdened with sin that they want to win the next argument, okay? Third is, talk is cheap. Action speaks louder than words. That's exactly what, even St. Therese said, I got to stop praying for this woman, this unlovable saint, and I'm going to act upon it. I'm going to love this person regardless of their faults, okay? The other is, a lot of times when we try to convert, especially when we're trying to convert someone, we might be full of sin as well, and they're looking at you going, well, you're not even holy, and why are you asking me? They're trying to argue about the great saints, okay? I see that a lot. You got people who are criticizing the Pope, and then they're trying to convert them to the Catholic Church. How can you talk out of both mouths, right? And a lot of times, no patience. And that's basically what happens. Basically, the reason why we don't use relationship is that we want them to respond as quickly as possible. And we just think that if we just say a couple of words, voila, they're going to convert, or they're going to, become, listen to what we say, and it never happens. So it's all about patience, okay? All right. So a lot of times it's this over-reliance on reason over relationship. And again, St. Therese, it's about relationships, okay? The problem with family and friends, a lot of times for some odd reason with family and friends, we just digress to criticism and disappointment. Okay, that's basically what happens. And that's with parents, that's with children, that's with our friends. We just have this disappointment. And I feel it sometimes, if I see my children doing something wrong, I'm like, and then we start criticizing. Okay, so that's the added burden that we have with family and friends. We also have prejudgments. Okay, a lot of times, parents look at their child like, you're that child that always was that child, and whatever. It's funny. I don't know how many times, and especially when I first converted back to the Catholic Church, and I started, talking about that. How many times someone in my family would say, "Well, David, I remember you did this, 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 and this," and they bring up all these, the bad things that I did in the past. Or even my friends, will say, "Hey, David, I know how bad you were when you were in high school or in college or whatever." And it's kind of like, yeah, but that's done, and we're something new. So a lot of times there's these prejudgments that get in our way as well, either on ourselves or even the person that we're talking to. Maybe it's a child that says, "Dad, you're always that way. You're a religious freak or a religious nut." Or you might have an employee that prejudges you as a boss. So it's these things that happen, that causes us to make it more difficult to have that relationship or even reason with people, especially reason with people. Parents always have a prejudgment on their children, and that's difficult. In fact, that's one of the difficult problems with parenting is that in every phase of a person growing up, your child growing up, the terrible twos, you have this child that can't talk, can't speak, can't do anything, and they just look so cute. Then all of a sudden they become 2 years old and they're saying no, they're talking without, discern. They just say things without even caring about anything. They're being disobedient, and now the virtue has to kick in. And then you have another period of really good times when they're 8 to 12 years old. But then they have their their teenage years, and there's constant adjustments that parents need to make that allows them to grow. And then once they become adults, 18, 21 years old, then they really are a full-fledged adult, and we got to treat them differently. And relationships need to change based off of that. You might have bad habits, okay, that just turns people off. There's an air of familiarity, okay. Listen to what happened to Jesus. It says in John chapter 6, it says, "The Jews then murmured at him because he said, 'I am the bread which came down from heaven.' They said, 'Is not this Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How does he now say, I have come down from heaven?'" So there's this air of familiarity that just can't be accepted sometimes when you try to argue with your parents or with friends, okay? So what are the problems when we work at work? Well, a boss-employee relationship, right? You get these bosses or employees that they're just, this is what I do, this is what you do, and I don't want to talk about anything else. And so there's this barrier, okay, that occurs. And sometimes that's difficult. We might have a very difficult boss that, the way that he thinks should be run is just Machiavellian. And if you step 1 foot off the line, he's going to, do some bad things to you, right? Or you might have an employee that's trying to finagle every benefit that's out there, to the point where they're very ineffective. Okay. So it's these things. And, also there's a workplace environment, policy that sometimes you have to follow. Sometimes you've got, a lot of worldly type advice saying, well, if this person behaves this way, then do this, everything else. But I always find that, having a relationship with, your boss, and I always say this when I bring people in, and I even said this one in the Marine Corps, you should always have a relationship with your boss and your subordinates. That doesn't have to be one of like, come over to my house and have dinner, but you should know a lot about them and get to know them. Okay. What their likes, dislikes, all these things. And I always do that. I always find, I get enough to realize the type of person they are, what's their concerns, everything that goes on with it. Okay. So, maybe their work behavior isn't the best. Sometimes I find there's a lot of Catholics who their work performance isn't the best, right? And they just rely on, the identity that they're Catholic and, my boss is Catholic and, and those types of things. But in reality, they're not really, really good performers. So you really have to be, in fact, for me, I find that I'm a better performer amongst Catholics because I want to show that, I'm not leaning on them because of their Catholic identity. That's what it is. Sometimes at work, there's no time to discuss certain topics, like religion or those types of things, or virtues and everything else. So, it's difficult to have that conversation because maybe there might be a policy that's about it, and it protects you from even talking about those things. So those are the problems that can occur either from an argumentation standpoint or even a relationship standpoint in trying to work things out. Okay. So how are we going to solve them? All right. I always have solutions for them. Okay. And the first is know one principle. Okay. And I always say this, right? Or I've said this before. Most people have some major sin or attachment for their issue. Okay. And the heart cannot be won over by reason, only by intimate connections. Okay. That is the only thing we have to understand. The heart cannot be won over by reason, only by intimate connections, okay? It's because it's kind of like this, all right? Sin makes a person so attached to something that they don't really see a greater good, okay? Just like a child weaning off of breast milk, right? We have to, the child is so addicted and attached to the breast milk, okay, because it gives it comfort. It gives it, it's next to its mother. It tastes good. But the child doesn't realize that there's actually better food out there, that there's, all these other great types of food out there. And sooner or later, the adult's going to realize, that child's going to realize it, because we do eventually have our own comfort foods that we get attached to. So it's the same thing. When people are attached to something, and usually it's sin, okay, they cannot reason. So we have to have more of an intimate relationship to draw them out of that attachment, okay? To draw them out, to make them do what's important, okay? Number 2, focus on relationships, okay? Relationship first, reason second, okay? That means no apologetics, no trying to convert them to whatever political party, you're in or anything else. Have a relationship with them, okay? Relationships will make you a saint and build your credibility as a saint rather than trying to, do that. Now, when I say that to build a relationship, that means there has to be a level of sincerity, okay? Saint Therese was not fake, okay? She wasn't gritting her teeth and saying, I'm going to like you whether it's going to kill me or not. No, all right? When I was talking to that, the person with the 101st Airborne Division, I was sincere and talking about a topic, okay? And listening with sincere interest. That's what makes this relationship engaging, is to be sincere, okay? Whether you like the topic or not is not relevant. But being concerned and talking and interacting is, okay? That's where sincerity comes into play. Sincerity comes into play is that you listen. Because this idea of talking and having a relationship isn't a brand new idea. I mean, there's a lot of books out there that talks about it. But the difference in how you implement it is important, right? I've seen people who read these books that tell you that you should have some form of relationship with them, and that you just look at them like you really don't care. You're just like, you're giving it the 5 or 10 minute, yes, we have to talk about latent things before we talk about work, right? No, be sincere. Talk with sincerity. And I'll give you an example. So I was talking. Lots of times, I have to get things done, right? And so building relationships takes time. As I said, it took me an hour and a half to get that task done because it took me an hour to build that relationship with that former person. So one of the things I had to do was I was on one project just recently, and I had to get this contract signed. And so I talked to this woman who was busy, and she, it was getting delayed because of this woman. And we were talking, and I said, hello, and let's say we'll call her Fran for this case. I said, hi, Fran, this is David. I'm from Fairfax, and I wanted to know, what was the status of the contract? And she goes, oh, I apologize. I couldn't get it signed because I got injured over the weekend, and I was out a whole week. And I said, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. What happened that you got injured? And she goes, oh, well, I was packing my car, and I tripped and fell, and I sprained my ankle. And I said, oh, man. I said, that must have been really bad. And I said, wow, if something like an ankle, I would be out for like a couple of weeks. And then she digressed, and she said, well, the only reason it was a week is because I'm an avid, she was a rollerblader. She goes, I think it was called a rollerblade, some rollerblading game. And I said, really? And she started talking about the rollerblading, like she was very, very interested in it. And I was like, wow, I never heard of this. She's explaining everything, and then I picked up on one thing, and she said, I grew up with a really loving father, and that father really brought me up on sports that were very individual, never a team sport. And I said, yeah, I know playing in a team sport is really important. I said, well, growing up, I wrestled, which was an individual sport, and I played football, which was a team sport. And I said, but a team sport is so great because it really helps with relationships, learning how to forgive, knowing what boundaries are and all this other stuff. And she jumped on that, and she said, you're absolutely right. She says, I was in a horrible marriage where, I didn't know anything about boundaries. I didn't know what, responsibility was. I took all of the responsibility myself. And I took all the problems to myself, and it was just self-destructive. And we had this big conversation for an hour. And at the end, she said, David, she goes, I can't believe I just had this really intimate conversation with you. And I felt like, you just drew it out of me and everything. And I said, yeah. And I said, yeah, but I do need to get this contract signed. And she said, okay, great. I'll get it signed. And, blah, blah. And she got it signed. But I spent a little over an hour talking to her about this. But see how one thing led to another? Because I just picked it out. And that happens all the time. A lot of times when I have a one-on-one meeting, I always say things like, what would you do over the weekend, or blah, blah, blah. And two things I always end it with, either something spiritual or something funny. I either make them laugh or make them contemplate. That's what I always do in the individual conversation. I don't do this in a group conversation because it's hard to do that. But that's what you do. That's how you start that's how you start a relationship. It can start with one little elevator pitch, like, how was the weather? Oh, weather was great. What did you do over the weekend? Oh, I did this. Oh, why'd you do that? Well, I was talking, things like, what'd you do over the weekend? They'll say, oh, well, I helped my mother do the window. And then I would say, oh, that was very nice of you. And then they'll say something like, well, that's annoying because my mother's blah, 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 blah. And then I would get into this spiritual topic. Okay. So it's great to bring in that spiritual aspect. But again, sincerity is the key, because they'll know. And as soon as you start giving them spiritual advice and it relates to exactly what they're talking about, they'll know. They'll know from a relationship standpoint. But if you just are like, yeah, yep, that's interesting. Yep. Hey, can you sign that contract? They'll know that you weren't listening. Okay. So sincerity is the key in relationship. Okay. The next is spiritual preparedness. Be spiritually prepared. When you have to confront a difficult person, you know it. It might be your boss. It might be a worker. So you prepare. And how do you prepare? Well, first is get yourself detached from a situation. Zoom out and get detached from a situation. Remember, St. John of the Cross says, if we truly love something, we become detached. It's only when we get attached so much to that person or to whatever it is. Maybe you're a parent that wants to convert their children back to the Catholic Church because they left, or maybe you're the boss that that this decision is absolutely wrong, and you need to convert him to think this way. Or maybe it's a neighbor that's that is voting the wrong way or something like that. Okay, you got to detach. You got to detach from the aspect that you're trying to convert. You're trying to change their mind or whatever it is. And just level it. So that's one thing. Okay. Pray for your person. Use the guardian angel to help you. I don't know how many times I've used my guardian angel to help convert people. Okay, and their ideas. Pray for whatever virtue you need. Okay. Zoom out and see the grand purpose of being holy and see Christ in that person. Okay. So that's what you do. Okay. All right. The next thing is don't trust your initial emotions. There's going to be that initial emotion of disgust when you hear like, oh, I forgot to talk. And I'll give you an example. See the Christ in the difficult person. Okay. I love Michelangelo's little quote. He says, "The sculpture is already completed when the marble block before I start my work is already there. I just have to chisel away the superfluous material." So Michelangelo was basically saying, as St. Therese was saying, is I see the artwork in the marble, just like we should see Christ in that marble. It's the outside facade that has the superfluous material, the material that is just not worth anymore. So what do? We have to see Christ in every person. And the chisel is the patience, the kindness, and the love which chips away the superfluous material to bring out the beauty of Christ in that person. That's what we got to do, okay? Now, remember, the difficult person is for you to become holy. And remember, no pain, no gain, okay? As I always say, God has given you this person to build whatever virtue that He wants you to build. I'm going to give you an example. I have a customer, and I'll call this woman Betty. Betty is she's a screamer, and she lacks a lot of virtue that kind of makes her very high driven and very in the caloric state, but panicky caloric state, where if you don't do something like within a minute, things blow up. And there's a lot of times where she'll leave a message on my phone. And it internally just makes me scream and say, oh, I got to call this woman and everything else. But then I have to I calm down and say, there is a Christ in that person. And then I always think and say, Lord, help me be patient. My guardian angel, talk to her guardian angel, calm her down. So when I talk to her, we don't, get into arguments, and let me be open to what your will is. And, I would say 90% of the time, 99.9% of the time, it works out if you're prepared. And then the preparedness will help you grow in the virtue. The preparedness will help you, come and take that opportunity for what it's worth, which is a virtue moment, which is a moment for you to become a saint. Okay. And now you're actually willing to become a saint. All right. Another thing you can do is zoom out. Virtue can only be acquired through practicing it. Remember that. Okay. You have to practice the virtue to acquire it. The next is accept them for who they are. Okay. A lot of our frustration comes into play is why can't they get it? Or why can't they just change? Why aren't they like me? Basically what you're saying is why can't they be like me? Cause I'm all perfect, right? That's basically what you're saying. I'm perfect and everyone has to conform to me. And they aren't, okay? You have to accept them for their weaknesses, like you have weaknesses, like I have weaknesses, for their they're sinners, like I am, like you are. And God has a plan for them like he has a plan for you and me. So we have to accept that, okay? So as a parent, maybe when we're talking to our children, and let's say we find out that they left the church, I'm just using that as an example, we have to understand that God has a plan for them, okay? And we have to see that God loves them more than we do. So that's important to understand. So accept them for who they are, especially when they're older. And for parents, it's very difficult because you've been, as time goes on, we're very controlling to our kids, especially when they're very little. You have to be very controlling, literally dressing them and everything. To all of a sudden, you have to adjust when they turn 18 years old that they're now a legal adult and they can do what they want to do. Okay. Another is don't be judgmental. Okay. As Jesus says, judge not that you may not be judged. All right. So judge, because when we judge people, that's really gives us a sense of urgency that gives us anxiety that is not necessary. Okay? Only God is the final judger. Okay? Even if our kids should go to jail for committing murder or doing whatever, there's always that hope that they'll convert and be loving. And God will change their hearts. So God has a plan for them. So don't judge. Don't judge our kids. Don't judge our boss, our employees, or whoever they are. You can judge their actions if they're good or bad. That's something you can do. That's what a judge does, in a legal court. But judging here means that they're hopeless. They're going to go to hell or whatever, right? So we don't want to judge their spiritual aspect of it. Okay. The next one is see God loves this difficult person just as much as God loves me. Okay. So seek that. Seek. Why does God love this person? Why does God love this person rather than, and let me see if I can see that. And then lastly is frequent confessions, okay? Frequent confessions to learn from your failures, okay? Remember, the key point here is that difficult people are in front of your life, or in your life, so that you can grow in virtue. And growing in virtue is growing in holiness. Okay, that's the most important. And so we're going to fail. I failed. I've yelled at my kids. I've yelled at my, customers. But by going to frequent confessions, okay, we learn from our failures and grow in them. And that's the key point. So it doesn't mean that we're successful tomorrow with handling difficult people. But as long as we can, prepare ourselves, and as long as we go to confession to identify where we failed, okay, where I tried to, maybe argue too much or whatever, that is, or maybe I was too attached. That is what's important, is learning from our failures and then trying to do better the next time. Remember, a firm purpose of amendment, okay? That's in our act of contrition. So firm purpose of amendment is, important, and that we are going to get better. And that, we try to do that. And eventually we will, okay? Just like playing a sport or like, learning an instrument or skill, in the beginning, you'll fail. But you'll get better and better and better, until you become a great saint, okay? So in conclusion, working with difficult people is God's will. Remember that. It's God's will that you work with difficult people, because that is how we practice virtue. And virtue is the way to holiness and love. When we can see Christ in each person and we frequently face difficult people, it becomes easier because virtue is being built. We must practice these virtues based on building a relationship and not with argumentative or apologetical works. Hearts are moved with intimate relationships and not by reason in most cases, because sin and attachments cloud reasoning. We must touch the heart through relationship building, and then reasonable discussions can easily flow from those relationships. Growing in holiness this way will make you want to desire to work with difficult people and realize and say, God must have sent you to me to grow in holiness. Let's end it with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Dear Lord Jesus, We understand that every difficult moment and situation of people you bring makes us holy. Help us to take that opportunity to practice our virtues, to love you more, to see that Christ in them. As we pray, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Thanks for listening to me, David Cease at Practical Catholic. Please share this podcast to others, especially if they have benefited you. Also, feel free to share any reflections or leave a comment on the podcast Instagram and Facebook at Practical Catholic, or visit my webpage at practicalcatholic1, that is the number 1.com.
You're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom